Welcome to the Kings Beat podcast. I am James Ham, your Kings insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. Joining me, Mr. Brenden Nunes from the Kings Herald and the Kings Pulse podcast. Brenden, what's going on?
Not all too much, James. Been very busy researching all these coaching candidates. There's a handful of ones that maybe I thought there wasn't that much research available on, and just keep finding more and more.
Yeah, it's like gold mining. You find a vein and you start chasing it. Yeah, it's a never-ending battle to try to figure out what is happening. We got a lot going on. First and foremost, me and Brenden are in matching onesies. It's our Kings Beat sweatshirts. Make sure
James
that
made me wear it.
I did not make him wear it. I did not. I guess we'll start there. Kings Beat. If you want to get one of these cool sweatshirts or the t-shirt version or hats or anything else, we do have a merch shop, which you can find down either in the newsletter if you're signed up that way, or in the description down in the YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up in the YouTube channel. Subscribe. Do all that for us right now while you're sitting here watching us, getting ready to do this marathon journey that will be... I don't know. We're going to go long here. It's been a crazy couple of days here in Sacramento. On top of that, Thursday night is Off the Record with the Kings Beat Virtual Happy Hour Part 5, and we're calling it The Return. I guess we can actually say why it's The Return at this point. Mr. Sean Cunningham is going to come back and join us. He has relocated in jobs, which 49ers defensive lineman Eric Armstead just broke on the Twitter box. Sean has left ABC 10 and has joined Fox 40 with some very talented young journalists there, and he's taken his 20 years of experience. And so he's going to come on the happy hour on Thursday, and we're going to talk about what's happened here and the craziness that has been the last 3 or 4 months, where Sean was a huge part of the show and then all of a sudden was no longer part of the show. And we'll kind of break that down as to what happened fully. On top of that, the happy hours are amazing. We have a couple of drinks. We get a little loose. We talk about things we shouldn't talk about.
Sean has a lot of things, a lot of stories too. You have a lot of stories that probably keep to yourself and maybe are a little more loose in the happy hours, and Sean has a whole lot to contribute to, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that specifically because this will be the first time that Sean actually won't be working that night. So Sean is actually going to be able to have a drink or two. So that's good. That's a good thing. We'll get Sean loosened up and we'll go at this thing. Plus, there's a lot that's happened here in the last couple of months, and having Sean's voice is always very appreciated because, like Brenden just said, he's got a ton of stories and a lot of stories about coaching. Everything.
Like,
yes.
I've been blown away by the stories that Sean has and just how many different fields they touch. It's ridiculous. Sean,
he saved Paris Hilton's life.
He knows. I don't understand how all these things happen, but they do.
Brenden is learning very quickly that he hangs out with two guys that literally have gone through their lives a little bit like Forrest Gump, where they just stumble into like some of the greatest scenes of all time. So between Sean and I, we just have this knack for being in the right place at the right time, and it does create a vault of stories that many volumes of stories that we have to tell, and we tell all of them unabashedly and slightly tipsy on the Kings Beat virtual happy hour. So again, Off the Record with the Kings Beat virtual happy hour set for April 28th from 5:30 to 7:30. I will send out the invite on Thursday. It will come along with your the early podcast. It will be in that email if you are a premium subscriber. If you're not a premium subscriber to the Kings Beat, You got a couple of days to jump on board. It's $7 a month or $75 for a year. You choose, but of course it saves you a little bit to go for a year, and it's well worth it. I have testimonials from so many people, if you want them. But yeah, it's a good time. We also, I'm gonna leave up the survey for maybe a couple more days. So if you haven't filled out the survey, fill out the survey. It will help us along the way, when we're talking to people like advertisers and stuff like that. So lots of good comments, lots of good questions. Some of the questions that are that have been posed to us in the as part of the survey, we'll probably handle when it comes to the happy hour. We'll have a discussion about certain things because some of these things are not for public consumption. And of course, the happy hour is never recorded. That is why it's called Off the Record. Okay, so Brenden, outside of that, we've jumped fully into draft season. We're gonna gloss over some player profiles here because, to be honest with you, there's too many things that are pressing on us right now. If you have a chance, jump on and read Sunday Musings, which was it's mock draft 0.5 because I did the top 15, and we talked about this the other day. But I'm basing my mock draft this year early in the process off of Brett Huff, who is a Kings fan and spectacular, but he does basically he rounds up all of the mock drafts and he does a consensus draft. So it takes all the other mock drafts in consideration and we use it as a consensus. I think it's a good way to start the draft process. We'll make major changes as we go along. But if we're looking at the consensus top 30 between like 10 or 15 different major mock drafts out there, it kind of gives us a better baseline. And then Brenden, you have been doing work over at the King's Pulse podcast. How is your player profiles going over there?
It's good. It's good. I'm, enjoying diving deeper into guys. I think there's always more instances. Why'd you have to point it out? We could have just moved on. We could have just moved on, James. We could have moved on.
We'll just move on. Go ahead, Brenden.
I'm enjoying doing more research on different NBA draft prospects. Jesus.
You said it, not me. Now I'm all red in the face. Oh my gosh, that was a good moment there, Brenden. That was a good moment.
Oh God. I feel like, yeah.
Whew.
There's always candidates that I think you come to realize are potentially better fits for the Kings than I initially thought, and different prospects that excite me more the deeper I dive, and always so many nuances to everyone, and
yeah,
that's all I got, James. That's all I got.
Can we move past your Tobias Fuquay moment there? I'm going to record it and play it back for you. Yeah. Anyway, sorry about that. Completely unprofessional. But man, that was,
it was really funny. I, at the beginning of my last, King's Pulse, I think I said I had a really long day and, was I did a pod with you the same day and drank a little bit at the beginning of mine. I was I'm just happy to do my pod and drink a little bit and be able to not watch my mouth or anything like this. And somebody reached out and was what, James is kind of stuck up, or is doesn't doesn't appreciate language or anything. I was guys, that is not the case at all. James is hilarious, and no,
I'm different
for the sake of being professional. Yes.
Yeah, I'm different behind the scenes, right?
Absolutely. Extremely.
Yeah.
So, as you should. You have to turn on professional.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that comes from, being in, We've got a breaking news sources. MRI on the left hamstring of Jazz star Donovan Mitchell was negative today, but he's dealing with bruising in both his quads. Yeah, that's not good. Bruising in the quads leads to pulled hamstrings. That it actually makes a lot of sense as someone who coached soccer and has soccer players with overdeveloped quads because all they do is use their quads all day, and then they start messing up their hamstrings, their T-bands. Yeah, I'm way different off the record. Yeah, definitly.
How are you enjoying doing your draft coverage and diving deeper into prospects?
Okay. Into prospects. You know what? I love it. I've always enjoyed the NBA draft, and I really do enjoy like kind of mulling over. And I think the point I was making earlier, before I got distracted by Woj's tweet, which, it's like a squirrel with me, like squirrel. I think I grew up going to church, so I have like church mouth. I know when not to say stuff and when to. And then I do get loose. Like I can be a smart ass and I do talk like a sailor most of the time. There's a lot of profanity that happens.
Experience it in the happy hour.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, even in the happy hour, I don't dive too deep into. I don't get too deep into profanity, but
no, but you see it a little bit.
Yeah, I get loose. Yeah.
So, by the end of it, there's a bottle of wine done.
Yeah, the bottle of wine or martinis or old fashions. It just depends on the happy hour what I'm drinking.
I will say one of our coaching candidates, Will Hardy, has this entire. What do you call it? The video that we have, a panel that he was a part of, a coaching panel, and there's a slight part of it where he gives a wine recommendation because it's coming up under pop, and I'm going to try to find this wine and drink this wine during the happy hour.
Yeah, A to Z, right? A to Z Pinot Noir. Okay. Yeah, I too was like marking it down. I wrote it down a couple of times, A to Z. I'm going to give it a shot, like if Will Hardy says it's okay. Actually, we were watching a video with Charles Lee, who is another coaching candidate. And at the end, he starts talking about wine, how he's getting into wine. And the person he was being interviewed with, I don't know, has ever had a glass of wine and tried to keep up, and it wasn't a good scene. So
it's like me trying to talk about wine.
I like wine. And you know what? Like the happy hour, shout out to one of the Kings Beat followers. He killed a bottle of, I think it was a bottle of Cab on the happy hour. Like I'm watching him the whole time swirling his glass of wine. And then I was so impressed that like clearly I watched him empty the bottle while we're on the happy hour. That I actually like called him out and sent him a sweatshirt. And then he sent me 2 bottles of wine. He reached out and said, "Hey, can I get your address to send a couple of bottles of wine up?" I'm like, "Okay." And he sent me 2 really, really nice bottles of wine. One is Dwayne Wade's wine, and one was CJ McCollum's wine, both of which are very, very nice bottles of wine. So, so the happy hour is a good time. So if you're not a subscriber to the Kings Beat, like a premium subscriber, you need to, because just one happy hour, I think you'll be hooked and you'll be like, okay, it's like half the price of going to the movies, and you get to sit at home and drink, and we tell stories, and it gets a little wild and crazy. All right, so we've meandered through the first 14 minutes of the podcast without getting to what we're actually here to talk about. And that is that following Thursday's podcast, Friday we started to see some news break. And we have confirmed through NBA sources that the Sacramento Kings they have 7 candidates for their head coaching job. They are currently doing Zoom interviews. It's possible that while we're recording this, they're actually doing Zoom interviews with potential coaching candidates. The goal was to get through the 7 candidates this week with virtual interviews, and whoever stands out, whether it's 2 people, whether it's 4 people, whether it's 5, the Kings are going to whittle their list down and move forward beginning either later this week or early next week with actual in-person candidate interviews. And it's a good list. It's an interesting list, and we're going to attack that list over the next 2 podcasts. So we can go, there's 4 veteran coaches, starting with Mark Jackson, Mike D'Antoni, Mike Brown, and Steve Clifford. All of these guys will get interviews. There are also 3 young coaching candidates or inexperienced coaching candidates, guys who have never actually coached, been head coaches in the league, in Darvin Ham, Charles Lee, and Will Hardy. Both Ham and Lee are on the staff in Milwaukee, and Will Hardy is the lead assistant under Ime Udoka with the Boston Celtics. We're going to take a deep dive into these guys. And before we do that, just, Brenden, is there anything that stands out to you with the list itself? Is there something that you're like, okay, like the way the list is broken up, the way that, veterans and experienced coaches, like, what is it that stands out?
I think just a lot of variety. There's older candidates, there's younger ones that are inexperienced, some seemingly different personalities as you kind of dive a little bit deeper into it. Like if you talk about Clifford being a coach who's known for his defensive, kind of getting the most out of teams on the defensive end, and then D'Antoni so offensive focused. Like there's just so much variety, and I don't know that there was, maybe outside of one, any candidates that scared me necessarily, which I think is also a positive. But that was definitely what stood out to me at first, is just that, there's a clear breakup between the young, inexperienced guys and the more veterans who have had head coaching opportunities in the past.
Yeah, Will Hardy is 34, and Mike D'Antoni will be 71 in a couple of days. It's a very diverse group. And you got guys who have had major league playoff experience in, of course, D'Antoni, Mike Brown. Clifford made the playoffs a couple of times. Mark Jackson was on a team that was building, and then, was let go in Golden State. But I think for the most part, it's a diverse group. It's diverse in many ways, actually. And I think you're right on when you talk about Clifford versus D'Antoni. Those two couldn't be more on the opposite end of the spectrum, and the inexperienced coaches, the guys who, we call them inexperienced, but I don't think any of them are what we would consider inexperienced by normal standards. All of them have more experience than Luke Walton still does to this day. They've been on coaching staffs longer than Luke. They've been on coaching staffs not as long as Alvin Gentry, which, again, I thought was at least interesting that neither Alvin Gentry nor Doug Christie even make the list, which means that, neither one are being considered. And I'll also throw this out there, too. I had some extensive conversations with people inside, and the list of 7 is what it is right now. It is the 7 people that the Kings are moving forward with that currently are unemployed, or, either that are currently, either unemployed or people that you can have conversations with right now. So that means that there isn't a guy like Quinn Snyder on the list, right? The Kings aren't going to call and ask Utah, hey, things are spinning out there. Do you mind if we interview Quinn Snyder for the job? So the list could expand, and we had James Borrego lose his job on Friday. I kind of feel like it's possible that the Kings put out this list on Friday because of the Borrego termination with Charlotte. Because when you look at, we came into Friday, there was only 2 open jobs in the NBA, the Lakers and the Kings. I have no idea what the Lakers are doing right now. They haven't put out anything as far as where they're heading or how they're going to handle their situation. It's a good job because it's the Lakers. It's a bad job because it's the Lakers and half your team is AARP members. They're ready to take NBA Social Security. And so that's a problem, and your salary cap is a problem. And the future of LeBron James is a problem, whether he'll be there long term or not. And what do we mean by long term? He's like, 37 years old. So look, I think when you see a team like Charlotte jump up and say, hey, we're also looking for a head coach, now you need to get your list of 7 out there so you don't have people drop off that list before you start doing interviews. You want a good list of candidates, and I think this is a strong list. Brenden, was there any omissions that you were like, hey, I kind of wish I would have seen this guy or this guy on the list?
I don't know about maybe I wish. Well, Atkinson, I think, is definitely the one that stands out. Kenny Atkinson. Mm-hmm. And I just realized kind of as we were talking that Frank Vogel wasn't on the list. And I think I got so caught up in researching the guys that are on the list that I didn't take the time to think about who wasn't outside of Atkinson. That was the obvious one to me.
Well, Terry Stotts as well.
Yeah, Terry Stotts. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I have, now that you say this, I've gotten so caught up in the guys on the list. I did not think much about the guys that were not
until
mentioned.
You said Frank Vogel. I completely forgot he wasn't on the list. Yeah.
Which says something about the candidates that we're not thinking of. Like, man, is there anybody else?
Yeah, actually, we're going to dive deep into these guys because I think that that's the best way to analyze this. And I was telling Brenden earlier before we started rolling tape, there are plenty of candidates on this. Like, I keep changing my mind, right? Like, if we, Brenden has an idea of who his, the easy candidate would be, and I have an idea of who my easy candidate would be. Who is your easy, who do you say yes to? Not who do you say yes to, but who do you think is the easiest? To say, okay, this fit.
I think that Steve Clifford makes a lot of sense because he's done a good job of taking teams that maybe aren't the most talented and seemingly getting the most out of them. And a lot of times the most means a first-round playoff exit, but I think he's gone into situations where teams are just looking to make the playoffs with a group that's a little bit of a tough ask. And it's similar to Sacramento's situation. I'm not saying that Clifford would be my favorite option, but I think considering that the Kings are in a position where making the playoffs is the end-all be-all next year, Clifford to me makes sense. There's the young guys I think that I'm going to end up liking better, the inexperienced players. But you see, for example, Ime Udoka in Boston, the first half of this season was really rough. There's growing pains that come with a young, inexperienced coach. And I think that if you are able to fight through those, that it could be better in the long term. Sacramento's situation, we talked about, you're not given, you can't just, have growing pains for 20 games. So
yeah,
that's why I lean
patience.
Towards Clifford.
Patience is a virtue, and the Kings are not very virtuous. They don't have patience at all, and that's why some of these younger guys, I think there's a tremendous lean that way right now in the league. We're seeing younger guys or first time head coaches not only getting an opportunity but wildly succeeding. And, I think some of them they're having growing pains in the playoffs and stuff as we're talking right now. But the fact is there's a lot of young coaches that are in the playoffs, Willie Green, Taylor Jenkins, Chris Finch, even you can say Nick Nurse. Nick Nurse is a guy who just a couple of years ago was, just like an assistant hiding on a staff, and boom, he gets a job and off they go win a championship. And so I think there are a lot of young coaches or inexperienced coaches that are starting to get their shot, but also really show that the modern young coach can succeed. And I think it's a lot because, just the way that you can digest information now. There's so much more information for young coaches. There's so many different avenues for young coaches to learn and develop. And so if we're looking at this list and I answered the same question that I asked Brenden, my like the no brainer, the guy who has like experience but is still young, the guy who's won but you have some question marks about whether like he can do it in a different setting, but still is probably the most stable like selection. For me, that's Mike Brown, and Mike Brown had tremendous success, but a lot of that success came with LeBron James. So it's really tough to gauge somebody who doesn't have LeBron James. I think, but we can say that about almost all of these candidates, right?
Yeah. It's funny. Maybe it's just because it's a time of year where I'm doing both, but I've almost started to look at these candidates as draft prospects, where I'm like, here's the riskier, high upside guys, and then maybe the safer ones but the ceiling is a little questionable.
Yeah, no, I think that is how you have to look at him. And a lot of the older coaches, again, Mike D'Antoni's been an incredible coach in the league. Absolutely phenomenal. I mean, he's won 50 games like 6 or 7 times. He's won 60 games a couple of times. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that I think he put up 65 wins with the Houston Rockets. But you have to be cognizant of everything, of like the fact that this team doesn't have the players that he needs for his system to really like thrive. I can honestly say that. Like D'Antoni needs like 15 shooters on his roster, and you don't have 15 shooters on this roster.
Like 2.
Yeah. So you would have so much work to do in order for D'Antoni's system to actually like succeed. And he's never really loved the big man. He's gone away from the big man more often than not, especially later in his career. So there's a lot of success there, but there's also a lot of like, how would this work? And we're going to dive deep into the veterans on Thursday. But today we're going to start with the other group. It's Darvin Ham, Charles Lee, and Will Hardy again. Darvin Ham and Charles Lee are currently on the Milwaukee Bucks staff under Mike Budenholzer. They both have been on that staff. They were both with Budenholzer in Atlanta. Charles Lee, 4 years. Darvin Ham, 5 years in Atlanta. And then they both moved over for the last 4 seasons in Milwaukee. The good thing about being in Milwaukee is that you're a winner. You've proven that you can win. You just won a championship. The downfall to someone coming from the Milwaukee Bucks is that there is only one Giannis Antetokounmpo, and the Kings do not have him. And so game planning without someone like that is going to be much, much different. And then the other one is Will Hardy. And, I think we'll start with Darvin, but again, there is a common thread between all of these guys. And the common thread is that they are part of the Greg Popovich deep-rooted coaching tree. Mike Budenholzer spent 17 years as an assistant in San Antonio. Since moving on to take over the job at Atlanta, he has created one head coach after another, which is a good thing. Quinn Snyder was on his staff at one point. Taylor Jenkins was on his staff at one point. Kenny Atkinson was on his staff at one point. And
Udoka, Borrego, go on and on.
Well, with it, when it comes
I'm sorry,
to,
I was talking. That was
with Pop. Yeah, with Pop, it's going to be a little different. And before we hit this, I'm going to say this too. I did ask the question, like, why Kenny Atkinson was not on the list, because I know Kenny Atkinson is a hugely popular name in Sacramento. He was actually the guy that I think most Kings fans were the most excited about. And the fact that he's not on the list was kind of like, hey, what's going on here? And I think there was some question as to whether or not he turned down the potential to be on the list. That's not what I'm hearing. I'm just hearing that the Kings had a list. It was much longer than 7 names. They did their due diligence on all of these guys. Some people, there's some things from one of their coaching jobs or another that stand out that someone may not have liked. And I think that's where Kenny Atkinson got taken off the list, that there was something just, at one of his stops that stood out that the Kings were like, okay, we're not comfortable moving forward with him as a candidate. And, a lot of other teams may not have that same issue. He's on the Golden State Warriors staff right now, and he's an excellent assistant, and I'm sure he'll get another head coaching job, but there was something that the Kings weren't comfortable with. And I've got to respect that, and because, they know more than we do about a situation, and then they also know what their values are behind the scenes that makes them come up with that as like a determination. And, it's their choice. And I'm fine with, the list that they have. I have some concerns about Mark Jackson and and his past. And I asked that question as well. And, I'm not sure that like Mark Jackson is getting a shot to at least interview with jobs right now. But I'm not even sure that I would consider him a major candidate for the Kings job as much as I would consider him on the initial list of 7 people. And we'll see how that goes, because the Kings have a lot of knowledge about Mark Jackson. Vivek Ranadive was a minority owner, but a very involved minority owner, while Mark Jackson was the head coach in Golden State. And Vivek was very clear when they hired Michael Malone as Vivek's first hire, that he believed that the Warriors' success was more on Malone, that the X's and O's was Malone. And we'll discuss more on Mark Jackson, that stuff, when we get to Thursday's pod. But I just wanted to clarify when it came to very specifically why one person was on the list and why another wasn't. Terry Stotts, again, is like Jill Adge put out there that he's currently like a coaching consultant for the Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz could be going through a coaching search themselves here in the coming weeks. And so I'm thinking that it's possible that Terry Stotts wasn't interested in the Sacramento job. I did not ask specifically about him because I forgot. So my bad. And I can do more research on that, but we'll hit more of those guys. So let's start with Brenden. Let's start with Darvin Ham. Why don't you give us the 2-minute tutorial on who Darvin Ham is and why he makes sense for the Sacramento Kings?
First of all, I'm shocked that Ham is the one we're going with first.
Oh yeah, someone asked if I'll buy him a fedora so he can be Fedora Ham as well. Why not? I actually think I've seen a picture of Darvin Ham wearing a fedora in the past, but go ahead, Brenden.
That would change everything.
Dual fedora hams.
Yeah.
Fedora Ham squared.
And Cunningham is a thing. Like, I'm a little worried that if Darvin Ham is the selection, there's going to be some unfair bias here, and I'm fighting an uphill battle.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, so Darvin Ham spent 8 years as an NBA player and was just a role player, really. Kind of did his job of fitting in where he could. And in his last year, he was a part of the Detroit Pistons that ended up winning a championship. And then 3 years after his playing career ended, he went to the G League and was an assistant coach then the D League, I guess, the Albuquerque Thunderbirds from 2008 to 2010, and then spent one season after that as the head coach for the New Mexico Thunderbirds. And then he moves on to the Los Angeles Lakers as a player development from 2011 to 2013, actually under Mike Brown. Mm-hmm. And then after that point, moves on to the Atlanta Hawks, as you mentioned earlier, and in 2013 until Budenholzer is let go from Atlanta in 2018 and follows him to Milwaukee, where he has been to this point. And Darvin Ham's name comes up in what feels like every single vacancy within the last 3 years, maybe even a little longer. I think that it's very respected that there's some ex-players that I think, because they are ex-players, are able to just walk on to coaching staffs. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think that there's obviously a knowledge that comes with being an ex-player and understanding all of how it works. but I think it's very respectable that he like did it the right, quote unquote, right way. There's a process of starting in the G League, and not even starting in the G League as a head coach, but an assistant there, and then slowly working his way up, and like taking his time to figure out how to work a computer to compile film himself, and just like learning all the ins and outs of what being a coach means and all the finer details throughout this whole process. And in my research, I definitely get the impression that he's, of the three we're going to talk about today, the most intense. I think that, you know, if there's culture is going to be a common theme and something that the Kings need to instill, and I think all three of these candidates have promise in doing that, and that's partially from coming from a Popovich tree. It's just going to be part of it. But Budenholzer obviously has carried over that culture into Milwaukee. But from my understanding, a lot of the time, if somebody is veering off from the culture slightly or using a little bit of a different language than what they've all agreed upon, that Darvin Ham's the one that's going to go and put them in their place in a respectful way. But he's a guy that just like commands your attention. He is very much a leader, and that's not, Budenholzer can't be the one to do it, but sometimes it's just he has other things to worry about, so Darvin Ham's going to be the one that goes and does that. So I think to me, he's very much, what stands out is just somebody that's very intense and going to demand that there is a culture in a respectful way. And it says a lot that he's the lead assistant on Milwaukee and has been for a while now, and listed in, I mean, I found the Atlanta Hawks opening, Minnesota, Pelicans, Bulls, Clippers, Pacers, like so many different openings. I think I'm missing a couple. OKC, like Darvin Ham's name has constantly been floated around for the last couple of years, and it's hard not to give him some serious consideration. But what did I miss here that stands out to you with Darvin Ham?
Yeah, well, I think this is why I love having a podcast with Brenden. Did you ever watch him play?
Absolutely not. I learned in this process that he broke a backboard, which obviously stands out. But no, I can't say I've ever watched Darvin Ham play until this last week.
Okay, so Darvin Ham was like a pocket Hercules, like a human highlight reel. He could get up, like I think I remember something like a 46-inch vert. Like he could sky. But he's also what I like to call the self-made man in the NBA. They're a group of players that don't just find instant success, that aren't first-round picks, that don't have guaranteed money, but who grind and grind and grind and make it. And the fact that Darvin Ham made it 8 years in the NBA is a testament to him and his work ethic, and the fact that he was a guy who did the little things that don't stand out on the stat sheet, but stand out when you're trying to build a culture and you're trying to win games. He did spend some time in Europe, but I'll compare him a little bit. There's a player in mind that I'll compare him to, and that's Garrett Temple. He's one of those guys that probably from his second or third year in the league, there was someone that was with him as a coach that told him, you're going to coach in this league. Like, you're going to be a coach. And there are a lot of players that want to live the coaching lifestyle or want to stay in the game. There are other guys that just get it, and I think he's one of those guys that just gets it. You talked about a couple of things there with when it comes to Budenholzer, and like he's become a bit of a quiet enforcer for Budenholzer, which is good because it's allowed him to take more responsibility. And like one of the examples we both read when we were going through this process of doing research on him is, I think it was the Bucks. One of the teams traded for a player, or they brought in a player, and that player, had been in the league, a veteran, and did things like drink on the plane, which is completely customary. There's a lot of teams that, alcohol is flowing on the plane and all that stuff. That's not how Mike Budenholzer does his homie, don't play that. So Darvin Ham looks back and goes, hey, I got this. And went back and had a conversation. And I said, we don't do that here. And that's not part of our culture. you know,
in all the stories are explained that there's never like an issue in those conversations. It's just expressed and explained in a respectful but very much this isn't happening way.
Yeah. And, you know, like I was around Corliss Williamson a lot. You know, he was a Kings assistant a couple of times. And like Corliss didn't say very much, but he carried a big stick. Like, you do not mess with Corliss Williamson. Like he'll like, everyone knows how he was called the Big Nasty for a reason. I mean, that guy will mess you up. So you don't, and I kind of feel like Darvin Ham kind of has that like, it's not even that he's an authoritarian. It's that he has a presence about him that is commanding. And that's good. And I think that, you know, for a team like the Kings that lack accountability, lack consistency, you kind of want to see a guy like this. This would be a good hire because, number one, he's not young. He is 48. You know, he's worked to be in the league for a long time. You know, he fought to stay in the league. Now he's worked his way up into a really high-level coaching job. You know, he's got the experience that you need as an assistant, ready to take that leap. He's gone through the interview process time and time again. There could be something that he needs to work on in the interview process that might help him get a job. And I hope that he's listening to feedback and that the feedback that he's gotten is like productive and that he's had conversations about why he hasn't yet got a job. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve one. And, you know, like Mike Brown has been coaching in the league for, I don't know, 12, 15 years, right? Well, they're only 4 years apart, him and Darvin Ham. And Mike Brown has, like, I don't know, a couple of hundred wins under his belt. So you're looking at one guy that got an opportunity versus another guy who has never got an opportunity yet to be the front man. But he's a lead assistant. He's a lead assistant on the championship team. A team that plays defense, a team that you know, is very efficient, that plays with pace, that does, you know, this is like the Bucks are a really, really interesting team. They're also very, very talented, and the Kings just don't have that roster. But you come through the system, like these coaching trees, there's a good thing to pluck from one of the coaching trees, because the one word that I keep hearing, and whether it's Will Hardy or it's Darvin Ham or it's Charles Lee, it's one thing, and it's honesty. That's the word that they always come up with, and they said it's something that Pop taught them, and we'll get to that later when we talk about Will Hardy. We actually have a clip of Hardy talking about this, but it's the ability to be honest with people and to set people straight, and whether it's the best guy on your team or it's number 17, your two-way player, if you can't be honest with a player and that player can't like accept what it is that you're trying to teach them, then you typically, if you're in Pop's system, then it's GTFO. Like, we don't do that here. You know, Steven Jackson, we don't do that here. See ya. We don't do that. And those are things that that I think that you're going to find from a lot of these players from the Pop Budenholzer coaching tree. But I think it's a key thing that really, really strikes a tone with me here in Sacramento. If you're going to go with an inexperienced coach, these are three that I would choose from. Like, or look around the league. I think these are three of the best candidates you could find if you want to start a team. If you want to start your team build with an inexperienced, give a guy his first shot in the league. Whether that will work in Sacramento or not, we don't know. But, you know, we've seen the Kings try a bunch of things. This isn't one of them. They haven't really gone with a young guy like this outside of maybe Musselman, and that was a long time ago. And that ended up being a train wreck, but for a whole other set of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, the deeper I researched these candidates, just more and more impressive. And it's, yeah, I mean, hearing them talk about the things like the Hardy clip we'll play later, it's funny how there's even times where I'm doing like my own bits of self-reflection because we're, you know, doing so much research about who these people come across as and their best qualities or maybe some concerning qualities. And, yeah, there are their differences, but I think every single one of them has a lot of promise, and the culture, the idea of building a culture, and that comes from being in a good culture, like them learning and from good examples. And obviously Budenholzer and Popovich, which are in a way one and the same, are top of the top when it comes to that. So I think that there's different ways that maybe they would go about enforcing that culture, or maybe enforcing isn't the right word for some of the other candidates. Like, I would probably use that word for Darvin Ham, but I think that it's very fitting, and I think I can make a good pitch in my mind for each one of these for Sacramento's opening, and Darvin Ham just being that sort of, there's no two ways about it. This is the way that we are going to function on a day-to-day basis. And instilling that culture, I think, is extremely intriguing to me. And, you know, there's an aspect, of course, with all of these guys of what is their staffs around them going to look like, and finding a balance, which is something that, like, Will Hardy talks about a little bit, but I'm sure relates to everybody, that you can't have all the same personalities on your staff, where if Darvin Ham is, or Budenholzer's maybe the one that's not trying to go and need to have that tough conversation, not that he can't, but that's not his natural personality, that you do have a guy like Darvin Ham that is able to do that. So I think obviously going to be important with any of these guys what sort of staff they build out around them as well.
Totally. And to kind of close the book before we move on to Charles Lee, there was there's plenty to read up on these guys. There's not as much video. Like, we could run a tape of Darvin Ham when he won his first game, filling in for Budenholzer, and kind of get like your media post-game interview. But there's not a ton of tape outside of that. There aren't, like, the good thing about the modern is this, like, we're on a podcast, right? You can get a lot of information from somebody on a podcast. You can get a feel for their personality. You can get an idea of what sort of their plan is, how they would lay things out. But one of the things that stood out to me is, like, there are times where guys, most of your team comes back in like the first week of September for training camp, which starts like usually around the 26th or 27th of September. So you start seeing guys filter in around September 1st. Some guys live in Sacramento. Some guys, like a lot of the younger players, spend their whole summer here working, and, you know, they have their apartment and they stay in their apartment and they just keep working out with the team. And so they're using the facilities. There's no reason for them to go find another trainer somewhere else and pay someone else when you have a training staff, a coaching staff, facilities, weight room, all that stuff here in Sacramento. But you start seeing these guys filter in early September, and they start playing pickup games. And one of the things I read was that like Darvin Ham was watching pickup games, and I think it was with the Bucks, and then like walked down on the court and stopped everything and said, "Hey, look, this isn't how we play. This isn't who we are. This isn't what we do, what you're doing right now. And so it's got to stop. Like, this, sure, this is just fun. It's just pickup games. It's all that stuff. But you need to practice what we do. You need to build the right habits now. So 3 weeks from now, I don't have to pull you aside and have a huge conversation about the stupid things you're doing on the court." And those are things where you're like, oh, okay. Like, someone is holding someone accountable, and in Milwaukee and probably in Atlanta, that guy is Darvin Ham. And so I think it's a really, really cool trait to have, as long as it translates in you have the yin and the yang, and you have the way to balance that. And I think that's what brings us to Charles Lee. He's almost a complete opposite. Not that he's a softie, but he's the guy who walks into a room and draws a crowd, because he's got an engaging, like, winning personality that jumps out at you. He's got charisma, right? And so Brenden, take over on our Charles Lee breakdown.
Charles Lee almost reminded me of like Doug Christie when you listen to him. Like, Charles Lee was a guy that I was like, I would love to cover him. I'd love to just have conversations with him. Like, he seems, and I think that that's one of the big things with Charles Lee is that, like, there's a quote from an athletic article from an Eastern Conference scout. He's talented and has a very good presence about him. He can relate to all walks of life and different backgrounds of people. And I think that comes from him having a complicated background himself when it comes to basketball. You know, he's 37 years old right now, but he played 5 years professionally overseas after having a interesting college career where he led in a team that didn't expect, not typical. I believe it's Bucknell.
Bucknell.
I should have that written down. Yeah, led them to the championship in both his junior and senior season. He beats Kansas and overperforms. He's player of the year in his conference, but is undrafted and actually had a cup of coffee with the Spurs in their training camp and played for their summer league, but nothing ever ended up coming of that until later, which we'll circle back around. But after the NBA isn't reasonable for him, he goes and plays 5 years professionally overseas with Israel, Belgium, and then 2 years in Germany. And then he's an assistant in college for a little while before. And his explanation of the process was kind of fun, that when he decides that he wants to be a coach, he got told everybody that you interacted with throughout the process of trying to get to the NBA or playing professionally or throughout your college career, like, reach out to everyone and ask what is possible. And it ended up being a college opportunity that came of that. But one of the people he had called was Mike Budenholzer, because Budenholzer was on the Spurs staff when he was undrafted in summer league and there. And Budenholzer, didn't have great college connections, but said, put me down as a reference. And years later, gives him a phone call when I believe it's Quinn Snyder actually left his staff, that there was an opening, and ends up bringing Charles Lee in to Atlanta in 2014. He spends 4 years there before he goes with Budenholzer to the Milwaukee Bucks. So 8 total years an assistant there, and I guess took on a larger role when Taylor Jenkins recently left in 2019. And the more laid back style, and how we talked about, like, him being somebody that people gravitate towards, he has a very good reputation with the players. Like, there's a lot of stories about his relationship with Giannis or Chris Middleton, and I think that does a lot for I mean, it's about, if you get in this research process, like I'm talking about how I find more and more as the more I look, I can only imagine what Monty McNair, Wes Wilcox process like when they're able to make phone calls to people that have firsthand experiences with these people. And Charles Lee, to me, is a person that comes off as so many people had good experiences with. One thing that really stood out was that he laid out his coaching philosophy in one of these athletic articles. He talks about being a big power positivity guy. And the 3 things that he pointed out in his coaching philosophy is 1, daily improvement, which doesn't just mean on-court skills. It could be diet or mental, but daily improvement. 2nd is competitiveness, both physically and mentally. And then the 3rd being togetherness, earning trust in a real, genuine connection. And I think that genuine connection is what stands out to me with Lee. Like, very good at building relationships naturally with players. And to me, like, you think of Darvin Ham as like he's going to make you play in that culture and demand it. And I think and that's not a bad thing or anything like that. Like, I think that there's also reasons that you want to do that. But I think Charles Lee is more of like, you feel like you just should play hard for this guy because there is that connection. And he more so is, it's just different personalities. It's a very laid back and have a good relationship with, but there obviously still is the importance of being honest and truthful that comes with it. But a lot of what stands out to me with Charles Lee is his ability to connect with people.
Yeah. Okay. So, like I worked for years before I started doing this, and like when you have a manager that's above you, but you're still like you're like a middle manager, right? And you have a boss that can be an a-hole and goes around and says stuff, and and is hard on employees, uh and maybe leaves someone leaves a room crying because they were so harsh on them. You need somebody who can pick that person up and put them back together and send them out there to do the job that you asked them to do. And that is where I see Charles Lee. He's a guy who, his connective tissue, he's a guy that brings people in, that like they do gravitate towards him. But they also, he's almost, again, the opposite of what we see from Darvin Ham. Darvin Ham is the authoritarian. So at the end of the day, especially at an NBA level, you actually do need like all of these types of personalities. You need like the brain trust that is Mike Budenholzer. You need Darvin Ham, who's sort of the enforcer. You need Charles Lee, who's the guy who picks people up and puts them back on the right path. And all of these guys like work in combination, and that's a really good flow. But when they get their own job, how do they project? And so I can see where, again, Darvin Ham may not, because of the way that he treats people, because of the way that he goes about his job, which again has always been professional from everything I can tell. But just the fact that he is sort of the tough guy, that may not work out that well in a job interview where they're like, okay, is this going to work? And then you see another person like Charles Lee who just charms the pants off you. And you're like, hey, look at this. This guy just, like, we're just enamored with him. Like, this is amazing. But now we're looking at two different types of personalities as opposed to knowing who's going to be a better coach. And so I think the Kings are at a point where they need a culture, they need direction. They don't necessarily need someone's best friend. They need someone to put this thing on the right path and to have sort of like that personality that can do all of these things. And maybe one of these guys can. So I think it's really interesting. Like, again, when we talk about the diversity of the candidates, it's like when it comes to experience, when it comes to, like how many job interviews they've had, like what their path to this point is. I think all of them are really intriguing. And, if I'm the Kings, number one, I'm calling Dante DiVincenzo to repair whatever damage I've done. But secondly, I want to know a little bit about what his thoughts are, because he spent like 3 years with both of these guys. He does know these guys and has a really good understanding of, how they handle people, who, like, what their X's and O's are, because you can't just be the intimidator, and you can't just be everyone's friend. You have to actually coach the team as well. And I think someone mentioned in one of the articles that like being a head coach is like being a CEO. Like you have to have your CFO, you got to have your COO, and then you have to have your middle managers. You have to have all these things in place where you're building something. And so I really do hope that it's not just about one interview, that someone blows you away. And, like I could see, Mark Jackson, Mike D'Antoni, Mike Brown, Steve Clifford, all being good fits, especially if you had a Darvin Ham, a Charles Lee, or a Will Hardy, like that you're building around. I could also see where I would really love to see the Kings go with a younger coach, because that is a trend that's worked. Darvin Ham, a Charles Lee, or a Will Hardy, and then bring in someone else that's a veteran coach, like a Mike Brown or a Steve Clifford or a Mike D'Antoni, to be an assistant, to work with these guys to make sure that the thing stays on its rails. And so, like, there's a lot of complexity here where, again, like having a guy like Alvin Gentry on your staff, it didn't just pay dividends because he kept this thing from becoming like complete basketball hell in the whole second half of the season. But he's a steady hand. Like, he can get you through a season. He can say the right things. He can demand things. He can say things to the media. He can still have a relationship with guys behind the scenes that make sense. So I don't know. Does all that make sense, Brendan?
Absolutely. And I think that this is where, to me, I would like to see De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis be involved, because I think those are the two most important cogs. And it's like, which personality between these candidates will they respond to the best? Because I think that when those guys are on the same page as the head coach and the other players see them getting criticized but listening to the head coach and being on the same page, that they will more likely fall in line. So I think that that's where it's very important to get these guys involved, of which personality are they going to respond to the best and be okay with working under. Because I think the Darvin Ham approach, like, some people might just take the wrong way. Not saying Fox or Sabonis, like, I don't know, but it's important to find out with your two main guys.
Yeah, and I think with Charles Lee, some guys can say, like, okay, we've had this type of personality here, that didn't work. So, like, there is going to be a balance here. Okay, that brings us to our third candidate that has not had a head coaching job before, and that is Will Hardy. And Will Hardy is. We have some tape on Will Hardy, which we're going to play for a very specific reason, because, again, I wish we had tape like this on the other guys, and there's reasons why there isn't tape like this on the other guys, I believe. And number one, Will Hardy is a guy that says yes, like, all the time. He also is a guy who maybe has had opportunities to say yes to requests for things like this, where you're able to get a one-on-one with him, and maybe that's because he's Spurs. Maybe that's, there's a multitude of reasons.
He talks about how much he valued the people that said yes to him in his process of coming up, and that he tries to pay it back. That even on days where it's like, man, I wish this person would just leave me alone, that he makes sure to find time to do that, because part of the Spurs thing is you're not allowed to leave until you've trained somebody to fill your spot. And I think that's part of what makes people that leave there good leaders. But I think it's very much a paying it back.
Yeah, you know what? That it's something that he does talk about in this. I don't think we have that clip in here, but it is something to Popovich's system that if you're a video coordinator, if you're like the head video coordinator, you cannot get promoted within the Spurs. You can leave and go somewhere else, but you can't get promoted within the Spurs until you have fully trained your replacement and they are of your quality. And that, to me, it's remarkable. Like, I know it sounds totally bizarre, but, like, this is, like, successful companies, they do this. They do things like this. So everyone, we could have an In-N-Out burger debate, but, like, In-N-Out burger won't open another store until they have a store director that's ready for his own store. That's how they work. They will not open another one until they have someone who has gone through every step of their program and has become so good that he needs his own store, and then they'll open a new store. That's how they work. And
Greg Popovich is the in and out of NBA coaches.
Exactly. The in and out, but he drinks it with a very nice Pinot. Yeah. Like a Pinot that you and I can't afford, Brendan. Like,
no.
And you would have no appreciation of either way, but that you and I can't even remotely consider affording. He will drink his in and out. He'll have his in and out with a fine Pinot. So we're going to roll tape on Will Hardy here for a sec, because, again, we have the ability to, like, not just talk about him, but let him talk about his journey and his process. The clip is a little over 4 minutes, but I think it's very, very valuable. And then we'll talk about, like, sort of him as a candidate. And here we go.
So I went through the first year. I was actually an intern on our front office side, working for our GM, R.C. Buford. I just finished playing in college, so I was asked to be on the court in the mornings for the player development workouts, basically as a punching bag, guarding guys, rebounding, whatever was needed to help our player development staff, with those workouts. So I came in the morning and did that every day, was able to develop a relationship with some of the coaches and the players just through being around on the court. So at the end of that first year, I was offered a position in our video room, move over to the video room and work for the coaches. And again, the mindset stayed the same. It was just whatever I was asked to do, I was going to do it. You know, like all of us, right? We all make sacrifices, personal life, you know, event stuff with friends, family stuff. You know, I did whatever I could, you know, for my job. And I was able to be in the video room for 6 years. 3 of those years, I was the video coordinator, you know, along the way. Again, that's why I say I'm the luckiest guy on the call. I got lucky 4 times. Some good timing, some people above me leaving. It kind of allowed me to grow organically within the organization, and just kind of keep moving up a little bit each year, taking on a little bit more responsibility each year. And again, I just tried to do the best that I could with what I was given. If this is my task, I'm gonna try to excel at this task. You know, I was able to forge a lot of good relationships along the way. I've now been in San Antonio 10 years. Been an assistant coach for 4. Ran our player development program for 3 years. Obviously, the list of coaches that I've worked for and with is incredible to me. Obviously, Coach Pop, Mike Budenholzer, Brett Brown, Jock Vaughn, Ime Udoka, James Borrego. You know, and these are all people that I've tried to learn a little bit from along the way. You know, you kind of steal bits and pieces from everybody, right? Like we've all been influenced, all coaches, like my high school coach, my college coach, all these coaches that I've worked for, just continuing to try to learn and grow. At the same time, I can't say it enough. Like I'm comfortable with what I don't know. I don't try to be a master of every field. I don't try to have all the answers. Again, it's a moving target. You know, there's a lot of you on this call that you may know more in a certain area than I do, and that's okay. I'm continuing to try to learn. I'm continuing to try to, you know, support our players and our head coach, Coach Pop, being consistent every day there for them, be prepared. And that's really, you know, the short story of where I am. I'd like to make this a little bit more of a conversation. I'm not much of a speech giver, again, because I don't think that I know any more than any of you guys. So if you guys have questions, I'd love to open this up and make it a little bit more of a conversation. If there's stuff particularly about me or my journey that you want to know about, I'm happy to share. But I really do believe that, you know, I still have a long way to go. I'm still learning a ton every day. I'm trying to improve. I'm trying to tweak things. I'm hard on myself. You know, I think I fuck up all the time. Coach Pop tells me I fuck up all the time. So I'm trying to continue to grow and get better as we go. You know, I've been fortunate to work for great coaches. I've been fortunate to coach great players. The fact that, you know, Tim Duncan or Manu Ginobili would ever do anything I asked them to do just blows my mind. And that speaks to the people that they are.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in. And I'll tell you, Brenden, like the list of coaches that so again, you can look at the incredible list of coaches that that we've seen from both Darvin Ham and Charles Lee, right? So like on one staff with Darvin Ham, Budenholzer, Atkinson, Taylor Jenkins, Quinn Snyder, 1 year. The next year, Charles Lee joins that staff, and I think at that point, that's when we saw Quinn Snyder get the Utah Jazz job. So, like, he's worked with some great assistants as well. But when you look at who Will Hardy is coached with, it's incredible. It's Pop, of course, who literally is probably the greatest coach of our generation. Well, I mean, without any question, and he might be the greatest coach of all time in the NBA. But Borrego, he forgot to mention Becky Hammon, but he did talk about Becky Hammon in that conversation where he sat with Becky Hammon on the team plane for 2 years and just like learned so much about the game of basketball from a true hooper in Becky Hammon. Brett Brown, Jim Boylan, who is an absolutely spectacular defensive coach, who again was a head coach but didn't work out. Emi Udoka, he forgot to mention Messina. He also Jacques Vaughn he mentions, and then in his last 2 years in San Antonio, he coached with Tim Duncan, and not only that, but he was a lead assistant on the Spurs his final 2 years before he left with Emi Udoka to go join the Boston Celtics. So we're talking about a guy who spent 11 seasons with the San Antonio Spurs, starting out as an intern on the non-basketball side, worked it all the way up to coaching their summer league team twice. Oh no, 3 times. He's worked his way up through all of these other assistants. He's taken in so much information with just having general conversations with these guys. He talks about it a lot in the whole entire video. It's really, really long. It's a really crazy video that I'll post down in the description. And he kind of takes over around the hour 26 mark. So for people who want to go in and watch it, it's an hour and 26, and then it goes all the way till like almost 3 hours. So there's a ton to take in there from him. Was there anything that stood out to you that especially off of that clip or whatever about him?
A lot. There was a lot that stood out. First, real quick, thanks to David Bentley, who hosted that It's a Rising Coaches panel, for letting us throw the clip in here and just doing that in general. I mean, even outside of just Hardy specifics, there's a lot of insight to coaching in general. But I think it's the humility. He is, says many times oh, I just got lucky a handful of times, and he was the college that he went to and played at, when he approached his coach there looking for a coaching opportunity, he said, I think that you should try to be an intern for the San Antonio Spurs. And he was like, that sounds great, but come on, I'm 22 years old. And he's like, comes to find out that coach has a long-standing relationship with Greg Popovich that goes back decades. And he jokes about how, initially it's like, how have we never talked about this? But Popovich at some point says, hey, do you, I needed a spot for an assistant. Do you know anybody? And Will Hardy gets his name put in. But he constantly is talking about how he got lucky. And I think there's examples of that. But one of my favorite quotes is that, to me, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And the only way that he's able to capitalize on somebody else going and getting a bigger opportunity, leaving the Spurs organization, and therefore there's an opening, is if he is ready to step into that and making sure that he's ready. And I think that while maybe there's luck involved, and I think it's great that he acknowledges opportunities, it absolutely is because of hard work and making sure that there's constant daily progress. And just involving everybody else. There's all these listeners that's a part of this panel, and the first thing he does after giving his own background is you hear it at the end, I'm not much of a speech giver, I'd like to open this up, and constantly saying I don't know any more than anybody else in this call. And that stands out right away to me.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that is probably the biggest thing of the entire video. You heard him say it there, that, he wants to open it up, right? For the next hour plus, he basically holds court, where it's a symposium where people are throwing questions at him. He's answering questions, but he's also bringing in the other coaches back into the conversation, asking them what their experience was with this. it's almost like he ends up teaching like the entire last hour and a half of the video. And to me, that was probably the biggest takeaway. It was that even though he's 34 years old, he has a command of the room and an understanding of how to involve people. And when we talk about a CEO of a basketball team, that's what a head coach is. That's the thing that instantly stood out. Like, oh, you're a CEO. Like, if you weren't doing this, you would be really, really successful somewhere else doing, some other walk of life, because he gets it. So he's going to be, like, he's my dark horse favorite at this point. And I was telling Brenden earlier, like, at the beginning of the day, like, he was my dark horse favorite. Then I read a bunch on Darvin Ham, and I started to like him a lot more. Charles Lee I like as well. But then I keep shuffling them. But the fact that, like, what the Kings need more than anything else is a culture setter. And that's where I look at him and I think I can see very clearly not just how you can be a culture setter, but how you can manage every aspect of it, and how you can go out and choose guys like a Darvin Ham and like a Charles Lee to balance your roster of coaches. And he's young, and if things go wrong, you always worry that, like, okay, what's going to happen next? Like, how is this thing going to spin out? But he has so much experience that, and his path to the NBA, it doesn't remind me of any of these other guys. Like, Darvin Ham played basketball, then he ends up in the D League, and then he works his way up. Like, his path is very specific. Charles Lee's path is very specific. But this is a guy who his path looks so much like Eric Spoelstra's like path to the league that it's like jarring. He did all the work. He's worked all of the jobs. He spent, if you heard it in there, he spent 3 years as like he headed up the development department, right? And they have Chip England there, who's like one of the great player development coaches of all time. Like, it's like Gergich and then England. Like, these are guys that have worked, that have developed so many players that it's crazy. I'll also point this out. This is another thing that I think it's worth mentioning. He hasn't, as a Spurs assistant or in their system, he's watched the good times. He's been there for the great times, where you have 3 Hall of Famers that are like a huge part of what you're doing. And he actually talked about this in at one point in the talk, where that when you have guys like Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker, 2 of them are already in the Hall. Tony Parker will be in the Hall of Fame, I guarantee it. Like, when you've got guys like that set the table, then it's really easy to get guys to fill into the other spots. And if they're not fitting into those other spots, then they're not going to be there, right? And so he's seen the good times, but he's also seen the transformation and how Pop refuses to let go and refuses to not play out every single minute of every game, and how the Spurs, who literally have lacked talent for like the last 5 years, have not had the talent to compete, still end up ahead of the Kings every single year. They still beat the Kings every year. And so I think, like, learning that and then having him get an experience like Boston, where him and Emi Udoka are there, and like it becomes like a bunker mentality early in the season. They're not doing well. They're failing. And then they figured it out. And now they've become like this monster that everyone fears could win the championship. So I really do think that, like, if I'm going with an experienced guy, he might be the guy that I'm going with, because I think this dude has, if it's not here in Sacramento, it will be somewhere else. He's going to be extremely successful.
You just see it and you hear it. It's so easy to talk yourself into it. And I think the Boston transformation that we kind of saw throughout this season, because I like poked around a little bit, asking some of my old Celtics friends, is that there was that sense of holding the top players accountable first and foremost. Is that my understanding is like Brad Stevens very much picked apart the role players. And then Udoka comes in and implements exactly what was talked about by Will Hardy with the Manu and Duncan and Parker, where it's like if those guys are getting harped on and picked apart every tiny little detail, then everybody else it's going to happen anyways. They're going to fall in line. And I think it's a tough transition for those top players, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, to be the ones that are so targeted at first. Like, I'm doing everything out there and you're going to talk about this tiny little detail. But once that clicks and it's understood, then it all ends up working out. And that's why, to me, that there was so much drama around Boston at the beginning of the year that it seemed like they were like publicly talking, like criticizing each other. And there was so much drama that made it seem like there was all this behind the scenes things going on, and then everything just clicks. And I think that is, it takes time to be accepting of like a Spurs way of going about things, but once it does, you absolutely see it. And I think that I'm with you that Hardy seems like a leader. I do think that there's a very big difference between just giving your input into the person that's to the person that's making the final decision and being the one that has to actually have the final say. But I'm going to believe in a guy that Greg Popovich is talking about potentially, like Greg Popovich is speaking so highly of, and when there's rumors or speculation that Popovich could retire, the talk is Will Hardy or Becky Hammon. So that's, like, to me, with all the ways that I'm able to talk myself into it and hearing him in these conversations, and then if I'm like, well, it's different to be the main guy, Popovich believing is all I needed to hear.
Yeah, and you know what? I think the biggest thing is that the Popovich tree has been so successful. Like, it's not just X's and O's. It's about building a culture that's sustainable, that is adjustable for talent, that it doesn't mean that he's just going to be a defensive guy or he's just going to be an offensive guy. And that's what we start looking at when we talk about, D'Antoni's the offensive guy, Clifford's the defensive guy. Like, it's not about that. It's about building something that is structural and has the ability to withstand tough times. And the Kings don't have that. And if there's one thing that's missing, it's and I've talked to Doug Christie about this so many times. He always says, what is Kings basketball? Like, can anyone say, what is Kings basketball? You know what it is.
There's no good descriptions.
No. It's a dysfunction. Yes, you're right. There's no good description at all. You don't know what Kings basketball is. You don't know what the only time that they've had an identity, it's one time, and that's under Dave Yeager, where they just run your ass off the court. That's their only identity they've ever had in the last 16 years. They're outside of that, there's no identity. That's where you need to bring in a guy who's going to find the identity. And that's why I got to be honest with you. I look at these three young guys. One of them should be, in my opinion, I would go with one of the young guys. I don't care about, you need to start building something, but that doesn't have to be next season. You have to see where it's starting to take shape next season, but you need to see that the culture shift is actually happening. And what I don't want to see is someone who comes in who assumes that they're walking into a turnkey operation and realizes very quickly that they're walking into like dysfunction and chaos. And I want someone who can build structure and put it in place and help you get through the tough times. But it's like, again, you build the old Bible verse, you build your house on the rock, on rock. You don't build your house on the sand. Because if you build your house on the sand, it just gets washed away. And that's the foundation of this team is a problem. And you need a foundation builder. And that's where some of these guys, like, I don't know how, like, again, not to bash on Mike D'Antoni or his age, but how does a 71-year-old establish a culture, establish a foundation for your team, and then by the time you get it established, it's like, okay, what, a year or two? Like, how many years do we have of you being at the highest level and being able to keep going with us? I think the Kings should be looking at, I love the list. They should be looking at someone that can be here long term. That's the hope. The hope isn't that it's a 2-year fix or that it's, the Kings special. You're going to coach for 2 years, but we'll pay you for 4. It can't be that. Not this time. So you need someone who can be there to build something with, and hopefully it's with Monty and Wes, and they build something. So that's where I would head if I'm in this job. And like, there's a lot of things to choose from here. I like Darvin Ham. I like Charles Lee. I like Will Hardy. And do I like one of them more than the other? It changes. But yeah, I'm willing to listen to all 3 of these guys, and I hope that they interviews via Zoom really well, because I think they should be considered.
So do I. They're very intriguing to me. I think that it is a weird scenario because I agree that it should be about long term, but next year is extremely important. So it's tough. I think that's why, like, we'll dive into it more on Thursday, but we had the conversation we did at the beginning of, like, Clifford or Mike Brown making sense. I would prefer one of these young candidates that you can build with and it be a long-term solution there and building that foundation like you're talking about, but I understand why that's tricky. And is that to you like it's the primary downside of a young coach? I mean, because any of these could just not work, no?
Well, any of these coaches cannot work. I mean,
Yeah.
Steve Clifford didn't work. Mike D'Antoni has had like multiple spots where he didn't work at all. Mike Brown got fired 5 games into the season in LA. Like, that didn't work. He also went back to Cleveland. That didn't work at all. Cleveland without LeBron. Mark Jackson, like, he got his ass ran out of town. Like, no questions asked. When your owner comes out and says there are 200 people within this organization that don't like you, that's a problem. It's okay if people don't like you. When it's 200 people that don't like you, and maybe he's exaggerating, but if
the owner went on record to talk about it, like,
if he's even remotely close to the number,
yeah,
you got a problem. And what have you done in 8 years to show me that you're different? What have you done in 8 years to show me that you're a better coach? The answer is nothing. Like, Mark Jackson hasn't been an assistant. He hasn't gone on to, like, forward himself where, again, like, if we're comparing him with Mike Brown, and we're going to do this heavily on Thursday, Mike Brown has been on, like, the best coaching staff, one of the best coaching staffs in basketball for the last 6 years. Like, if you failed, okay, let me be better then.
Every single one of these assistants that we talked about today, the young, inexperienced ones,
yeah,
have more time on a coaching staff than Mark Jackson.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's stunning. And again, all of them have more time on a coaching staff than what we saw from Luke Walton. And I'm not bashing Luke. I mean, Luke is one of those guys that works his way into the league. He's not self-made because he's a Walton, but he's still, as a player, like, not a player that you expected to make it. Like, he came out of Arizona, and sure, was he good? At Arizona, he had some moments, but I mean, he's a gritty player. He's not some, flash in the pan or some high scoring guy. He's a guy who stuck in the league because he's a smart player. So again, it's not to bash. It's that, like, these guys have experience. They're guys that you hope that you can build around, that can be around long term, and that you can kind of, they've already proven that this is what they do. They're gamers. They're coaches. They've been in the league 10, 11 years as coaches, and I think that that's good. And then the other thing, like I mentioned before, like, with Mike Brown has gone back and he's, like, found success as a Warriors assistant, right? Well, like, Dave Yeager is doing the same thing in Philly. Like, you know what you know, and you should know what you don't know, and you need to learn from other people. And so that's why I think learning from the stack of incredible coaches that have gone through San Antonio, like learning from those guys, each one of those is an opportunity to take in more information. And if you're a sponge, that's how you should be thinking of these things.
And Will Hardy very much comes off as a sponge. And he actually got asked in this panel, I'm sure an extremely tough question of what is the main takeaway that you will have from Greg Popovich. And I think that's the one other clip we have here.
It is. It's a great clip, and I think we'll talk about this after. There's a reason why I think this clip is so important.
I'm going to say the one quality I'll take from Pop, if I move on, shit, that's tough. Honesty. Like, he's not afraid to be the bad guy. He'll tell guys the truth in uncomfortable situations. Doesn't sugarcoat it. I think he always has very direct dialogue with the guys. They know where they stand. It's easier said than done. But he's really, really honest with our team, with our staff. So I'd hope that I could be as much like him in that way. I think sometimes we get caught up in, like, you're trying to tell the truth, but sometimes you don't want to, like, hurt a guy's feelings, or some people don't like to be the bad guy. He has no problem being the bad guy. And that's not being vindictive. That's just, this is the truth.
Now, do you guys have to go in behind and try and pick him up?
Hell yeah. I mean, that's a big part of our job, is getting them back to level sometimes, especially because we're playing 4 games a week. There's not time to, like, wallow in it. And so sometimes they're getting hard messages in a film session. We have a game that night. And so you're trying to get them back to level. But that's, the dynamic of any staff, right? Is, like, you're all a little bit different. The personalities are different. If we were all like Pop, we may have a problem. And if we were all, happy-go-lucky, it's all good, well, then we'd have a problem too.
Yeah, I think what's so valuable about this clip is I think this is what separates the Spurs from almost everyone else. It's the approach that Pop takes, and the reason why it's so valuable in this discussion is because all of these guys, even though Darvin Ham and Charles Lee have never coached with Pop, this is the prevailing thing that Mike Budenholzer brought to the table. This is the Pop coaching tree. And I think it's super, super important. And that's why I like these guys as much or more than I do the guys up above. The other guys might have, their own lineage to go through, their own path to the league, all that stuff. But these guys here, they've all been in that this new NBA where I think there's a point where Hardy talks about, like, the new NBA, you're dealing with players that have, like, switched high schools 4 times. And then they get to the league and they have, like, little ticky-tack injuries and they got to shut it down. And you're just like, what in the world is happening? It's like this new the culture of the young player now is very frustrating for coaches. Like, rub some dirt on it, go out there and play. And so even though he's only 34 years old, he played Division III basketball, but he still played college basketball. Like, he wants to be he's a gamer, like, right? And so I think what you're seeing is like weird cultural shift, and he's not down with that. He's not going to coddle players. He's not going to be okay with all that. And to be honest with you, he literally, without saying Marvin Bagley's name, he describes Marvin Bagley. And it's like, that's the frustration where you're dealing with people who, Like, again, not to bash Marvin, but someone who switched high schools 2 or 3 times, and his brother, the same thing. His brother entered the transfer portal and also entered the NBA draft last year, and then pulled out of both. And it's just like, man, choose a path. Choose a path and stick. Like, the grass isn't always greener, and you need to be held accountable for something that's happening here. And I'll tell you this: when I've interviewed people, like, the worst thing you can do in an interview, this is life lessons from James. The worst thing you can do in an interview is when someone goes, "Well, why did you leave your past employer?" And when the second you start talking trash about your manager, about how you just had a personality conflict, or how they wouldn't work with your schedule, or how they didn't treat people well. You know what instantly happens with a manager, with someone who's interviewing you? They instantly look at you and go, "You're going to say that same damn thing about me when I let you go 3 months from now." And so that's the problem. Like, there has to be some sort of accountability, and some people come in to a situation and don't have accountability. And I think that's a good thing about not only the Pop way, but like when we see someone talk about stuff like this, like Will Hardy, like, who's honest about it, like, there needs to be a different level of accountability now. And it's an accountability with your medical staff. It's an accountability with your assistants. It's an accountability with your development staff, with your trainers, with everyone from top to bottom. Like, you have to build something that can withstand, like, even like Sacramento, we have the Delta breeze, and this thing it folds like a house of cards with the Delta breeze blowing on it. This isn't something that could withstand a hurricane or a flood. This is something that can't withstand the Delta breeze. So you got to build something strong that can withstand, the rigors of not just an 82 game season, but the next 400 games, 5 years of basketball, like 410 games, whatever that is. Like, can you withstand that? Like, you have to build something that can like support that weight. And so I'm hoping they find the right guy that can do that.
Hopefully, and I very much believe that it could be one of these 3 young candidates that we went through today. I think throughout the course of this conversation, I find myself flip-flopping on which one would be my favorite. And for me, it's very much between like Ham and Hardy, and I absolutely would have no issues with Charles Lee. But what do you view as the questions with hiring a young coach like this? Like, where would you be skeptical? Because like we said, anything could go wrong with any of these guys. They could not work. But is it not almost like an increased risk with these guys that haven't been the number 1 coach?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll look at it this way. Vivek, like, his first hire was Michael Malone. It was the right hire. He was a coach who had not had that opportunity before. He was the right guy then. He should have been the right guy 5 years later. Didn't get that opportunity. So patience is an issue, right? And like, we've talked about this, like, even when I talked about Vivek at the end of the season, or like right before the end of the season, like, this is a huge moment for him. Can he back away? Can he allow the basketball people to do basketball things? And I think we've already seen this. Like I can guarantee you that the conversation at mid-season, at 17 games into the season, was that if Alvin Gentry doesn't want to accept the role as interim, then Doug Christie will be the head coach. And it was very specific because that's what ownership wanted. Like, but Doug Christie's not on this list. So that tells me that, like, the internal struggle, maybe we are seeing someone who's learning, that is saying, okay, I have to step back a little bit and let this thing kind of mature. But I'll go back to the point. It's that Michael Malone, you can find success even in Sacramento with a young coach that hasn't had the experience before. Michael Malone was that guy. He's probably outside of Dave Yeager, the best coach the Kings have had since Rick Adelman. And you didn't figure out a way to like make it work. So I think that if you're going to go with one of the young guys, like back away. Let them develop who they are. And the other point that I'll make when it comes to that is you just did this with Monty McNair. You brought in a guy, a first-time GM. Let him grow. Let him hire his own guy. Let this thing grow organically. That is how you do it. Mark Jackson, Mike D'Antoni, Mike Brown, Steve Clifford, of that group, the only guy that I think can change anything instantly is Mike D'Antoni, because that's his game plan is just so different, right? He's the only guy on that list that will change anything instantaneously. And I don't think that's sustainable. It hasn't been sustainable anywhere he's been in the past. Eventually, he wears his welcome out and he's gone. And the Kings, like, they don't have time for that. They have time for, a young guy to develop this and to do all that. But they don't have time for it. They don't have the roster and they don't have the time, because if you're hiring a 71-year-old coach, there is an expiration date. And so that's a problem, right? So if I'm looking at the group of 4 that are like the vets and I'm comparing them to the young guys, I guarantee you have just as good a chance of success with one of these young guys as you do with one of the older guys. And they've gone through one older guy after another, some of which were like, again, like Paul Westphal. Keith Smart was on his second job. He had just been the Warriors coach just not long before and got dumped when they went through an ownership change. Michael Malone was the only guy there that wasn't a quote-unquote retread, but then you went to Ty Corbin, who had a lack of success in other places. You gone through George Karl, who had imploded in other places. Dave Yeager was doing just fine, except for the off-the-court stuff that they couldn't work out between them behind the scenes. Again, Luke Walton, the only one that in my 12 years of covering the team that was really honest to goodness, like a first time, let him roll out there, let him make some mistakes, was Michael Malone, and they just pulled the plug too early. And we can all see. And so that's where I'd be like, why not? Like, it's working all around the league, but also the other path never works for you. You're not choosing between Red Auerbach and Greg Popovich and Phil Jackson here. You're not. Like, might as well see if one of these other guys are, because they could be. And we know the other guys aren't, so the other guys could be. And that's better than not knowing, than already knowing the answer, right?
100% with you. And, looking around the league, like Udoka, obviously Taylor Jenkins, Borrego, there's like a complicated situation with him getting let go, but Charlotte did improve. You see like Wes Unseld, Jamal Mosley, Mark Dagenal. I ask how to pronounce his name and educate myself all the time and can never hold on to it for some reason. Willie Green. Yeah, I think I already said Taylor Jenkins. There's so many examples around the league. And I think that it's just slowly what the league is becoming more and more. And I am more than happy. I 100% agree with your wording of, I think with the other coaches, they aren't phenomenal. They could be good. But, like, from their track history, you would know if they were just freaking amazing. And maybe these other 3 can be that haven't gotten an opportunity yet.
Yeah. And I mean, there's always a possibility that one of these guys it's like Kismet and it just works out perfectly and the Kings just capture lightning in a bottle. I just don't know. Like, again, like the easy selection of that list of the veteran coaches is Mike Brown for me. And that's just because, he's like, his continued education is to go to the Golden State Warriors and spend 6 years with the best club in the league. 2 of those years, of course, they struggled, but still, they happened to develop a guy like Jordan Poole. Like, okay, that happened while he's there. So, anyway, I think it's an interesting discussion. We're going to continue this on Thursday. We didn't do Tuesday overreactions. I'll just say this: Tuesday overreactions is the Kenny Atkinson situation. And I'll just say that like maybe we need to take a step back because there's probably more reasons than there are just like a blatant like the Kings overlooked somebody. They didn't overlook somebody. They did their due diligence on a group of coaches and this is what they came up with. There's still a possibility for guys like Borrego or Quinn Snyder, if he becomes available, or name that head coach that could get fired in the next like 5 days, to become part of this. But I think they're pretty set on what they're doing. I guess let's get to the business of basketball. I got nothing. We've had a really good discussion here about these coaches. I guess.
I had a weird like self-reflection process in doing this.
Okay, let's hear it.
That just the way that these guys conduct themselves, and so much of with these assistants that you don't have, like when we go through the candidates in the next episode, it's going to be different since we're able to look through their track record as head coach and dive into their offensive and defensive production based on what roster they had. And it's different with these guys. You're diving so much into personalities and what's an intriguing personality and in their route of improvement. And like the one that stood out to me was definitely Hardy talking about the thing that he takes from Popovich is not being afraid to be the bad guy. And I had this, I think I very much tell people what they hear a little bit more than maybe I should tell people what they want to hear. My dog goes crazy with their toy in the background. So I guess, it was interesting to me that in this process, I had a lot of self-reflection and like came to conclusions of like, I should be like that a little bit more.
That's interesting. No, I think it is because like, again, I think my self-reflection, it goes back to like what I did. And it's partially, this is because of age, like because age and life experience. Like I'm much older than Brenden and I've had like a lot of different life experiences being in management and hiring and firing people for a long time. Like I know what I'm looking for when I'm interviewing someone. And, if you haven't been through interviews and haven't done interview processes, and this doesn't just like when I'm looking at these guys as potential, like if they were sitting across from me type things, I think of it the same way when I'm interviewing players. Like I look at players in the same way that I looked at potential hires and, potential employees. And I always kind of look at it that way, like how, and even like the managerial style thing, right? So a good manager walks in the door and instantly starts picking out the good things and the bad things about the managers that are around them, the people that are around them, even if it's the employees that are around them that are good or bad. And you use little bits of who they are and what they do well, or the things that they do poorly. And you think, okay, I won't do that. Well, like that's something that I've always done. And it's something that like again, Will Hardy jumped right in on. Like he really has learned a lot, like from all of these different voices in the room. And the voices in the room are, it's like 7 first-time head coaches. It's nuts how many people they've put into the league from the Popovich coaching tree. And that's what is super intriguing, but it's also like something where I'm looking at it like I like the way that he thinks. And I'm going to point it out again. We don't have like there are some like weird YouTube videos that we've watched about, Charles Lee getting interviewed by like some buddy or something, I don't know. That like you don't glean that much from it, and it wasn't worthy of us putting out there as a clip. You can also like when it comes to like post-game interviews, like that's one way that we could have showed you a little bit of Darvin Ham, but that's really not him. That's him doing coach speak at the end of a game and trying to explain, what happened in a game and stuff like that. That's not a good way to process who these guys are. And that's the one advantage we have with Will Hardy is that we have this like basically living document that you can view and you can see how he handles things. And you can see that he's loose, but he's also like very structured and very like professional, except for when he drops the F-bomb a bunch of times. And like, I think he would fit in really well with De'Aaron Fox. I think that's the type of guy that Fox is looking for. He's looking for the director, the person that commands the room, that demands accountability. And I think that's why, again, Darvin Ham and Will Hardy have both stood out to me as on this first level of coaching search, which is our, the first-time guys.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting to get, I got to further educate myself on some of the other candidates that we're going to talk about in the next episode. And it'll be fun to dive into them because, the further that I research, I find myself more and more intrigued with maybe certain candidates that I was not the most interested in initially.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I mean, you're right. It's very similar to our NBA draft, our draft prep. You like someone initially, and then you dig in, you're like, I don't like them nearly as much. Or you don't like somebody, and then you spend a little bit more time looking at them on film or in person. Like, again, I wasn't a huge Paolo Banchero fan. He's grown on me. Where Keegan Murray didn't grow on me, and people don't like that, but it's just the way that I look at tape, and like, again, and then there's people, and I think this is a perfect example. There are people like Tari Eason, and I don't know if he is Josh Smith or if he's Thomas Robinson, and people will go, oh, well, those are two totally, well, not really. It's one was successful and one wasn't. They both basically came into the league with the same skill set. Just one of them translated and one of them didn't. And it became down so that's where, like, I love this draft process, but it's also, I think it's a good, it was a good tune up for the coaching search that we're going through right now.
Yeah. We don't know if we're getting Taylor Jenkins or, the Chicago, we mentioned him earlier, Jim Boylan.
Jim Boylan. Yeah. And was that Jim Boylan's first head coaching gig?
Not sure.
I'm not sure, but he would probably still be a really good assistant because he's really good defensively. Yeah, and I would also, I love the combination of, like, you could get a Will Hardy and a Steve Clifford, or if you can get a Darvin Ham and a Mike Brown. I just don't think that the Kings can lure one of those guys as an assistant, one of the veteran guys, or like a perfect thing where, like, if you could get like Hardy and D'Antoni or something, like the combo of those two. Now we're looking at something intriguing.
Yeah, I think Ham and Lee, if there's any chance where Lee all of a sudden is the head assistant, like, I don't know, talking about dreams here.
See, again, I don't think you can
personality combination.
I don't think you can steal both Bucks assistants.
Probably not.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough money, but I also don't think that, like, that would be a really, really big time sales job. Like, hey, can we get both of you guys? Yeah. I don't think that that's going to happen. Okay, Brenden, do you have any final thoughts? This is our longest podcast ever. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, like, I just end up in going down random paths and doing all this research, and it's been fun. Found a lot more than I expected to.
The best part is, for me, is that you keep finding all these things and then sending them to me, and then all I have to do is read them. So that's been a fun part for me.
Perfect. Yeah. I love copying and pasting the link. It's my favorite part too.
That's right. All right. Let's just touch base on a couple of things. Thursday from April 28th from 5:30 to 7:30 is Off the Record with the Kings Beat Virtual Happy Hour Part 5, The Return. We'll have more on that as we get closer. If you are a premium subscriber to the Kings Beat, you will get the Zoom link. And we will have a very good time hanging out and doing the whole happy hour deal. Also, if you have time, jump on and do the survey. Also, the Kingsbury merchandise shop, there is a 15% off coupon code in the description, and on the in the newsletter, it is KB Pod, all capitals, KBPOD. Saves you 15% off your Kings Beat merchandise. I'll probably run that for like another week or so. Outside of that, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks building up to the draft. We've got the draft lottery is May 17th. That's really not that far away. There's plenty of good basketball going on in the playoffs. The Kings just aren't partaking in that.
And there's teams that you can look at and like hypothetically try to figure out how Fox and Sabonis work and see the pairing. You know, like when you talk about, for example, Levine and Vucevic on the defensive end.
Yeah.
Or there's a lot of pairings where if you try to figure out, you know, what's the optimal way to use Fox and Sabonis, there's a lot of different ways throughout the playoffs going on right now that you can try to translate it.
And unfortunately, Levine went into health and safety this morning.
He did.
Yeah. This is a playoffs that has been marred with injuries and weirdness. Yeah. See, this is why you don't put asterisks on things, because even this season, whoever wins this thing will be decided, chances are, by an injury. You know, there will be a team that dropped out because of a major injury or something. All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Kings Beat podcast. We've gone long, and it is what it is. We apologize, but we're hoping to give you like incredible content here, and hopefully you stuck around all the way till the end. To when we tell you that Demarcus Cousins got fined for one of his for saying something or doing something in the Denver Nuggets last game. Not surprised. It's been a little rough, and I think he feels like people aren't being fair. And I watched a few of the clips and watched a few of the games, and sometimes I agree with him. But reputations are what reputations are.
A lot of people not unhappy with calls right now.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah. Especially like Chris Paul, if he's got to have another game with Scott Foster. What are they, 0-17 career-wise when Scott Foster's reffing his game in the playoffs?
Jeez.
Yeah. So that could just be that Scott Foster is a really good ref who does not buy into the crap that Chris Paul pulls, or it could be a mixture of a couple of things. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Kings Beat podcast. For Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast and the Kings Herald, I am James Ham, your Kings insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. We will see you on Thursday.